Hello everyone and welcome to the Goulburn Valley Online Future Orchard Walk. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rose Daniel and I'm the Technical Manager for APAL. I'm sorry we can't be there with you in person today, but we're really happy that we can still present the Future Orchards program and share information with you. Today's theme is The Future is Now, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Nigel Swartz from TIA, who will provide a summary on the learnings from the PIPS2 fertigation research project and launch the Sonata tool. Jonathan Brooks from AgFirst, who will explore current and future issues such as labour, trees, quality, climate and technology. Mick Cressira from the Goulburn Valley, who will provide an update on the latest demonstration trials being run in the Goulburn Valley. And Jonathan will then take you on a virtual tour of several leading New Zealand orchards. So before we move on to our guest presenters, I quickly wanted to run through some of the activities that APAL has been running over the last few months. So as you're probably aware, much of Eastern Australia was affected by the bushfires over the last summer. APAL was involved in assessing the damage in a lot of those areas and preparing a submission to the government to support recovery. And applications are currently open for New South Wales government funding. If you haven't heard about that and you'd like to know a little bit more, please get in touch with us at APAL. In May, staff at APAL were also trained in the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed by Plant Health Australia, and we're currently developing standard operating procedures to ensure that the industry is better prepared in the event of an exotic plant pest entering Australia. These types of emergencies, such as the bushfires and also biosecurity, have made us a lot more aware of the value of understanding what makes up the apple and pear industry. And we've commenced a tree census pilot study, which means that we'll have a better understanding of how many trees are grown where, and the industry will be much better prepared to respond to emergencies in the future. There's also a lot happening in the future business space. The future business team are continuing to collect insurance related data to understand how much businesses are paying for insurance and what type of coverage is being accessed. If you'd like to be involved in this or would like more information about it, please get in touch with Rochelle Zealy, and you can see her email address at the end of point 4, just there. And finally, we're also planning the next round of future orchards. So if you've got any feedback, we'd really value that, and we'd love to hear from you so that we can continue to provide relevant content as we move forward. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Nigel Swartz, who will present the outcomes from his research into improved water and nutrient use efficiency for apple orcharding. I'm sure most of you already know Nigel, but just in case you don't, he's a research fellow in the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture at the University of Tasmania. His research expertise is in the field of tree physiology and tree crop nutrition. Nigel leads the fertigation project for the Hort Innovation and Apple and Pear Levy-funded PIPS2 program. Nigel, it's my pleasure to hand over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And thanks so much for joining us this morning. And it's great to see such a huge turnout, actually. This is probably the largest turnout we've had, and it's a real privilege to be able to present the last few years of work that we've been doing at TIA across the country, actually. And so this work that I'm going to be presenting is apple tree nutrition for improved productivity, and it's really about all the information and the background data that goes into our online tool, our Excel tool, Sonata. And this work by no means is mine. It's a combination of collaborations between Plant and Food Research New Zealand, and there's a guy there called Steve Green, who's a data scientist, and he's compiled all our data over the last few years and put that into this tool. Our soil scientist, Marcus Hardy, has provided lots of soil analysis from the different growing regions across the country, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And many of you guys might have actually met Marcus when he visited your orchards in the Goulburn Valley. And also B. Zheng Tan is a PhD student, and B has taken on a lot of the nitrogen work that I'll be presenting a little bit later. And Professor Dougal Close is our project supervisor. So moving on, Sonata is the primary model which has been developed from this project. Essentially, it's a decision support tool which stands for Strategic Irrigation and Nitrogen Assessment Tool for Apples. A bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's a decision support tool that will guide advisors and growers on the optimization of your irrigation and nitrogen resources for the major apple growing regions of Australia. The focus of Sonata is really to understand how water and fertiliser application, and we're thinking about types, rates and timings here, can be managed to satisfy tree requirements, mitigate leaching, and also optimise productivity without a cost to fruit quality. And I'm really excited to be able to show you some great data from our previous research on this. Now, the model requires climate and soil data, which are based on local databases and research that we've done in your orchards, and it also requires information from the growers about tree varieties, yields, and aspects of management. But before I go too much further, I just want to take you through a little bit of the learnings that we've made over the last few years about apple trees and the physiology, and how we've compiled all this physiological understanding into the backbone of the tool. So, I mean, you guys will know this really well. We are operating in a deciduous system. The leaves are fallen off the tree at the moment, and at that same time, all the nitrogen that is in those leaves has been withdrawn into storage organs. Those storage organs are, your branches, your trunk, your roots, and they provide. They sit there over winter quite happily, and they provide that first 1 to 2 months of spring nitrogen demand for the next season's growth. And so what we know is that all of that early green flush, all of flowering and that early bud development comes from nitrogen that's been stored and remobilized from the previous season that sat there over winter. But then if I point you to the top right section here, this is a sort of a chart around nitrogen use efficiency. So this is the amount of nitrogen that's contained in your crop and gets removed at harvest, plus the amount of nitrogen that's required for your tree to grow. And that is relative to the amount of nitrogen that gets applied as fertilizer. So we know that your apple tree nitrogen budget, your apple orchard nitrogen budget, is essentially comprised of 3 major resources. First of all, it's that nitrogen that gets remobilized and recycled from season to season. And we know that is actually a very significant contribution to your annual nitrogen budget. The second is nitrogen that gets taken up from the soil, and that can come in 2 forms. Obviously, mineralized form, so all your organic matter that gets broken down, your tree prunings, the leaves that fall off the tree, or your mowings. That eventually becomes a nitrogen resource for your tree. And that can be anywhere up to 20 to 30 units a hectare, depending on where you're growing your apples. And then finally, it's the nitrogen that you put on as fertilizer. And this is the bit that we can actually control. And this is the part that we're talking about in this tool here. And then point you down to the bottom picture here. The other aspect which is really critical for us to understand is how much water your tree uses. So this is really important for us to be able to do our irrigation scheduling. So the way in which we have calculated that is through Sap Flow Monitoring. We have been to orchards where we're yielding, they're 8 to 10-year-old trees. They're yielding 70 to 80 tonnes a hectare. And we've monitored in Victoria and also Tasmania. We've monitored how much water those trees use over a period of 3 to 4 seasons using Sap Flow technology. Essentially, that's just a heat pulse method, and it tracks the amount of water that goes through the sap of the tree as it transpires throughout the day. And that gets calculated into the model, and we have some really good understandings. And I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later. So what's also really important for us to understand when it comes to apple growing is the soil in which you're growing your apples. And Marcus Hardy embarked on a major campaign throughout the country to characterise the Southeast Australian apple growing region soils. And we are still yet to get to WA, but that's planned in the next few months, or next month or so actually. So in that bit of work, Marcus visited a wide range of orchards. He dug a great big trench with a dingo digger, and he studied the morphology of the soil. He did a really thorough description of what your different soil layers look like. He took lots of photos so that you're able to view what your soils look like, so you have a bit of an understanding of where your roots are and also the different profile layers. We took soil chemistry data from each of those different layers. And then the most important aspect is the hydrology. So this is how much water your soil can hold, how water moves through your soil, and what is what are what would be required for your irrigation set point. So with regards to your refill point and your stress points. And then throughout all this information, Marcus was able to make some management recommendations to how to get the most out of your soil or improve your soil health so that you can grow better quality apples. And all this information is actually contained in the Apple Soils website, which can be found on the APAL link. And I'm sure if you just dig around in the APAL website, you'll be able to find that, or Larissa will be able to, and Rose will be able to share that link with you. But what's really important is all that background data gets inputted into this model, into this tool. So this is one of the sheets that sit in behind the Excel tool that you can't actually access. But what we've done here is we've tried to show you all the information that actually gets inputted into what would happen when you select a particular soil type. So say, for example, you're looking at soil number 6, the Goulburn clay, or the 7, Goulburn loam. We know about it's been given a drainage class, and that relates to your KSAT, the sand content, the clay content, your organic carbon content, and your organic nitrogen content. And then there's a whole stack of scenarios here around your soil matrix potential. So the software comes preloaded with all these different soil types from these apple growing regions. You pull down, a pull down menu is used to choose your particular soil series. We have about 22 soils that come from the PIPS 2 soil surveys, which are obviously described in that Apple Soils webpage. So it's that link there is going to be is there for you to access. And if you're unsure about what soil type you have, you can actually quite easily click on that link, have a look at the pictures from an area near where you're growing your apples, and see if you can find something that matches how you think your soils might look like if you've ever dug a trench, or you've ever dug some holes or excavated with a digger in your orchard somewhere. And we're still working on WA soils, and that'll be added to the tool when we've sorted that out. Then there's a whole stack of other data that's come from the Victorian Soils database. So we actually found that Victoria across the country had the most up-to-date and relevant soil information compared to the rest of the country. So the next aspect of the work, and this is also a hidden screen or a hidden sheet that you can't actually see, but it shows you, gives you the idea of what sort of data goes into the tool. The software is preloaded with historical data from 22 climate stations, and these have been downloaded from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology database. And these records include daily values of ETO, air temperature, rainfall, and harvest seasons from 2000 to 2018. And we select, you guys will select the climate, and that'll load all that data into the worksheet. Okay, so this is where some of the physiology aspects come into it as well. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of data on how much water trees use, and also the strength of that Sap Flow technology in also enabling us to be able to calculate ET, which is your crop factor related to the leaf area index of the tree. So, and that modelled aspect based on all the climate variations is what goes into the tool. So what is really interesting is here's a 2-year-old apple tree chart, and below that is the 3-year-old apple tree chart, and tree water use is in black. And what I want to point you to is the variation that you can see here, and that is because trees respond very significantly to the temperature, the air temperature, the wind, how windy it is, and also how much water is whether there's been rainfall events or humidity in the air. So I think what's really interesting to show is that at the peak of summer we're looking between a 2-year-old apple tree which doesn't quite have much of a crop on it yet is using between 5 to 6 litres of water a day. This is just one tree. And then you move down to the third leaf, and when you may have 20 to 30 tonne a hectare on it, you're starting to move up to 8 to 10 litres per day, and we know that on in Tasmania at least, a fully grown apple tree, 8 to 10 years old, yielding 80 tonne a hectare, we're using up to 30 to 35 litres a day per tree. So this little chart here on the left shows you essentially a modelled aspect of tree age to water use, the crop factor that goes into the model based on tree age. So we can accurately model how much water a tree uses based on the age of on the age that you input of the orchard. So that's a really valuable tool that we've learned from the Sap Flow data. Now the next aspect is your kind of expected yields. So there's the tool will do two things. One, it'll calculate an anticipated yield that you might have based on your tree age and where you're growing your apples and the variety and that sort of thing. But we also want the ability for you to be able to set your anticipated yield or your desired yield, because that's going to have an influence on how much nitrogen is going to be required and also how much water is going to be required over a season. So we've got all this information from the OrchardNet website, OrchardNet database, and this is data that growers from across the country have inputted into OrchardNet through the Future Orchards program and your Focus Orchards program, and we've got some really good data on 4 varieties. So, for example, here's a Granny Smith, and you can kind of see that around 10 years, the line is the yield line in terms of tonnes per hectare is starting to plateau. We're looking at about 75 tonnes a hectare to 100 tonnes a hectare at about with a 10-year-old to 20-year-old apple tree. And moving a little bit lower, I think this is a really interesting aspect of a really nice way of comparing varieties. That line starts plateauing for a pink lady at about 75 to 100 tonne a hectare at about 5 years. And this information is really critical for us to be able to input into our tool. Now, our tool's only as good as the data that we've got. So the more data that gets inputted into OrchardNet, the more reliable our tool and our model can be. So continuing on with the physiology theme, it's really important for us to understand exactly what a tree does with nitrogen over a season. So on the next 2 slides are going to show you what happens with nitrogen in the leaf, in the canopy, and then what happens to nitrogen and how it's partitioned over the whole tree. So in this chart on the left, it shows you 4 lines, and these come from 4 treatments, where the green line is a treatment where we've applied 15N. So 15N is a stable isotope of nitrogen. It actually allows us to track the movement of fertilizer N that we've labelled it as calcium nitrate. So just a normal calcium nitrate fertilizer that you would normally put on. Track that over the course of the season post fertigation. So we did a full rate of about 50 units, which is the green line. We did a 50-50 split, so 25 units pre-harvest and 25 units post-harvest, which is the grey line, and then the summer, which is a post-harvest only. We did a 50-unit application post-harvest, so after the fruit had come off the tree. And essentially what we did is we tracked the total N of that tree, of the leaf. So we did fortnightly leaf laminar total N sampling. And, obviously we saw a really an immediate response to that nitrogen application. So we started our nitrogen application about a month after full bloom, so mid-November for us down in Tassie, and we tracked that until leaves fell off at about week 23. And you can see that that early nitrogen application, or at that time, did lead to an increase in leaf N. But I don't have the error bars here, but I should point out that difference actually wasn't significant all around from probably week 6 onwards. But what I did want to point you to is this week 19, week 20 spike, and you can see that spike for all treatments. And what that demonstrates is that as soon as leaves came off the tree, as soon as the fruit came off the tree, there was a huge reallocation of nitrogen into the canopy, and that really demonstrates how strong a sink that fruit is during that premium time, or that peak time of growth for the apple tree. And so once the fruit had been removed, we saw a huge increase, or an increase back into the leaves for the remainder of the season. But then this chart on the right, I want to point you to, because this is the 15N, or the fertilizer nitrogen component of the leaves. So we applied nitrogen again in mid-November, and we can see a huge increase of the fertilizer N that's made its way up into the leaves at this point here. And we can see that, there's a big decrease in with the 50-50 split. And then again, what I really want to point you to is week 20. And this is where a post-harvest application only. And so in week 20, what we saw is so this is the fruit had come off the tree. We applied 15N, applied fertilizer. We saw very limited uptake of nitrogen at this point in time. And this is I want to get draw you. I guess try to get us to understand the difference in the nitrogen use efficiency of pre-harvest versus post-harvest application. And this is what is really going to be demonstrated in the next slide. So of these same trees, we excavated all these. We excavated 16 trees, so 4 reps per treatment in winter dormancy. And so this pie chart on the right shows the amount of fertilizer nitrogen that was contained throughout the various organs of the tree, and including the fruit. So the pie chart shows down the bottom here, 9.7 grams of N per tree was recovered from these trees that were received pre-harvest application, whereas the post-harvest application received 5.3 grams of N per tree. So it was about 50% less. So the question is, where did all that nitrogen go? And why was there such a significant difference in the amount of nitrogen that was recovered, which is all about your nitrogen use efficiency. So what we did see is that about 50% of your pre-harvest nitrogen was contained in the fruit of the tree, and that's that's in this green part of the pie chart here. And the rest of it, except for this light blue, is your storage organs. But you got to remember that this blue is what I draw. This blue and the pink here is what I want to draw your attention to. This is 14.9%, 14.7% of 9.7 grams. Whereas if we're looking at the post-harvest application, obviously there's no fertilizer N in the fruit. However, there's large amounts of recovered fertilizer N in the root and in the trunk of the tree. However, we're talking about 42% of 5 grams or 41% of 5 grams. So what this data is suggesting is that the trees are much better able to take up your fertilizer and use it much more efficiently with a pre-harvest application. And that pre-harvest application actually does allocate nitrogen to storage. So generally the thinking is that your post-harvest application is really there for building storage reserves. However, we have been able to demonstrate quite clearly that your pre-harvest would do exactly the same thing. Now, the other thing to note is that the other reason why we're concerned about pre-harvest application is because we don't want to have a negative impact on fruit quality. But what we're advocating is a much lower rate of nitrogen use applied frequently, as in like once a week for about a month to 2 month period, totaling nothing more than 30 to 50 units a hectare, split over that 1 to 2 month period. And we know that from this data set, we know that we actually didn't see any fruit quality differences, no significant fruit quality differences. So that's our recommendation. Our take from this data is that a pre-harvest is going to use nitrogen so much more efficiently and is going to be a lot more effective at bringing improving your nitrogen efficiency in your orchard. So what's the point of this, and how does this relate to the tool? Well, this information has gone into developing nitrogen demand curves for leaf and fruit development. And that's been obtained by a least square fit to experimental data. So this leaf data operates as a function of days after bud burst, and that's rescaled using growing degree days for other varieties and other locations. And all this information has come from your phenological data that you input into your OrchardNet database. So exactly the same thing's done for fruit. And we know that looking at the chart above, we can accurately model the amount of nitrogen that's contained in your leaves and in your fruit over the course of the season. Okay, so this is the front end of this. This is the front end of the tool. This is what the tool is going to look like, and it's supposed to be simple. It's supposed to not be overwhelming in terms of the amount of inputs that's required, or overwhelming in terms of the outputs that you're going to see. But all the overwhelming stuff is done in the sheets that you can't see. But so, for example, you select your apple variety through a pull-down menu. You select your tree age. You select your tree spacing and row width. And that's going to obviously tell us how many trees per hectare you're running and how old the trees are, and you press to update that chart. Then we really need to know your irrigation infrastructure. Whether you're running a microjet or a drip irrigation system, we need you to input the rate, litres per hour, your emitter spacing, your duration of events, and then your return period. So how often do you irrigate? 2 times a day, or 2 times a week, or whatever it is, how many days between irrigation events. And then you can report the output in either millimeters or megalitres per hectare, depending on how you prefer to see the output. But what I want to draw your attention to is the tree parameters, because this is really useful information that you can actually, all this bottom table here and this table on the right, this is the information that you can have a conversation with your advisor, with your agronomist, with your irrigation specialist, about how much water your orchard's going to need and how much nitrogen your orchard's going to need. So the tree parameters, obviously, we can only estimate root depth because we haven't been to everyone's orchard to know exactly how deep your roots are. But from where we have excavated and our understanding of apple tree physiology, we can estimate these root depths. We've got an estimate on drought tolerance, and that's a fraction of the total available water based on our soil characterization work. And then we also can estimate, based on the OrchardNet data, what your expected yield is for that orchard. And the next two is what I really want to draw your attention to. So if under this scenario, a 6-year-old tree, under this spacing and row width, we know that your crop nitrogen components, this is the amount of nitrogen that gets removed from your tree every harvest period, is approximately 22 units a hectare. And your leaf nitrogen, so this is the amount of nitrogen that gets contained in your leaves, is about 46 units a hectare. And we know that a big portion of that's going to get recycled and stored. Another portion of that is going to be dropped off into the soil and mineralized for remobilization, or for root uptake the next season. And then it gives you a bit of an understanding of your phenological timeframes, and all this information has come from OrchardNet. And then it's given us a field capacity, a refill point, and a wilting point number in millimeters of how much water your soil can hold, and then a total available water, and then the readily available water. And these are all about what you can take and discuss with your irrigator for your irrigation set points. So, what we really want to know from you is what your irrigation set points are, what your irrigation strategies are. And we want to be able to, input your strategy so that you can meet the demand determined by this tool here. Okay, so for the purpose of this demonstration, we want to show you a few worksheets, and these are the outputs of Sonata that are used to, obviously you've selected the climate and soil type, you've displayed, this is the display of tree water use as a function of these factors that you've inputted, including age and variety of the trees and planting density of the orchard. You've selected the climate data from a pull-down menu before, you've selected the soil types, and then this chart obviously estimates the tree water use. So the top chart is in litres per tree, and this graph will scale automatically depending on what scenario what values you've entered. And this is up in obviously the Goulburn loam with the Antitura climate. Fuji trees, 6-year-old. We know that it's fascinating that these trees are in the peak of summer are up to 40 to 45 litres per day of tree water use. So you're obviously in a much warmer climate. We know that your rainfall is about 457 millimetres, and your irrigation, the annual water balance, so this is the amount of irrigation that's required, is about 412 millimetres a hectare. And then obviously, as we talked about before, you can change that to whether you want to see that in megalitres or millimetres. And so here's a chart that it's probably not going to mean that much, but it's going to show you the variation that we see from season to season. And essentially what we've got here is the water content of the soil at various depths, and how your irrigation supply can meet that water that root zone soil water. So I mean, this is something that your irrigator will really have a really good handle on, and your irrigator will also be able to see how your irrigation supply is going to vary depending on the climate scenario. And what I really want to draw your attention to is the fact that this is not at the moment, this is not a real-time decision support tool. I mean, we can't forecast yet. We can't go, okay, it's going to be particularly dry, or it's been particularly dry over the last 2 months. We know we're going to get a big dump of rain, for example. How is this going to influence our irrigation? We can't do that within the season yet. The plan is, with the next part of the work that we're going to do, we're going to turn this Excel tool into something that's going to be online. It's going to be a web app that's really user-friendly, that you'll be on your phone. It's going to link to the BOM forecasting tool. It's going to link to any soil moisture software that you have in your orchard. And it's going to feed with all this background information into a real-time decision support tool for your irrigation. So you actually can make that real-time decision on how much to irrigate and when. So here, and for example, this is where it's going to be really helpful. So I want to draw your attention to, so this chart on the top is just ETO and rainfall. So this is just your standard climate chart. This is what we know is your region receives on an annual basis. But the bottom chart is what really matters. And we know that your annual water balance, you require on average about 425 millimeters a year. And we can see how that is actually split on a monthly basis. And the tool gives you a mean millimeter application that is required to meet your soil moisture requirements to grow your good crop. What is really interesting is that you've got a much greater water demand than a lot of other regions as well. So if I move over to a grove scenario, we've kept the soil type the same, we've kept the apple type and the year the same, but we're in a cooler climate, a wetter climate. We can see that the tree water use is significantly less. The amount of rainfall that the trees receive is significantly higher, and this changes. And also the other thing that's really interesting about the grove side is that the climate conditions are much more uniform. So you can see here our required annual millimeter irrigation volume is about 124 millimeters, which is substantially less than what we found up at the Goulburn Valley. So, and here's just a breakdown of the amount of the monthly irrigation requirements for the apple trees. And we really don't have to get cracking until probably November down in southern Tassie for your irrigation, depending on what's been happening in that season. Okay, so look, I've probably gone over time here. It's obviously very difficult. I can't be there with you face to face. It's very difficult for me to be able to give you the feel of the model, or for you to be able to play around with it yet. We're probably still about a month away from just idiot-proofing it, making sure all the scenarios do what they're supposed to do. And now is a really good time for us to get feedback from you guys about what is important to assess. We really want to be able to make this a strategic tool for scenario analysis and planning. And I really see value in perhaps me coming to the region and going hanging out with Michael and seeing if you guys are really keen to come and visit Michael in his office, and we pour over one of these tools together with your irrigators or your advisors, and we try and get a real good handle on how this tool is going to work. It's going to sit on the APAL website for you to download. It'll be free of charge. And yeah, look, I think it's important to acknowledge there's some knowledge gaps. Obviously root depth is a really important one. Impact of soil restrictions. So we don't know exactly how compacted your soil type is. Those kind of things are really important for us to think about as factors for knowledge gaps and how we can fill those gaps. We also want to build in flexibility to be able to adjust irrigation set points. So this is really about what sort of strategy that you guys like to adopt when you irrigate. Do you have a okay, we need to build a fruit size right at the end of the season because the market's wanting this size fruit. So we need to really quickly increase our irrigation amounts. Now, we need to know what sort of strategies that you adopt, what sort of root zone drying strategy, what kind of stress do you like to give your apple trees at various times of the season. So that's important. So I really value your feedback. You know, my email address will be available. My mobile number will be available. I'm really keen to have a chat with any of you growers or advisors about what you think is important to include in the tool. The other thing I want to make mention of is the opportunity for metrics. There's a really good opportunity to look at water use efficiency and a cost-benefit analysis of the amount of water that is required to produce your crops relative to the amount that water costs and the net return on your apples. So I think there's capacity to build that into the tool as well. Hey, look, that's probably all I have to say about that. Really keen to hear back from you guys, even if it's anonymous or even if it's, please just give me a ring, get in touch with me and keen to chat as much as you like. Thanks very much for participating.
Thanks, Nigel. Your work really shows that there are a lot of opportunities for using nutrients and water imports more efficiently and not compromising the fruit quality and yield as a result. So it's very interesting. Thanks, Jessie, for kicking off the questions. We really appreciate it. So Jessie's asked, how well does age and canopy volume correlate? And that relates back to the nitrogen section of your presentation. And I guess adding to that, probably including tree density and growing system type, because obviously they affect the canopy volume as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. That's great. Yeah, look, I think that age and canopy volumes correlate well in those first 5 to 10 years. I think, when the trees get beyond 10 years, I think it's much more difficult because the canopies are full grown usually between 5 to 10 years. So, I think it's much more difficult to get that strong correlation between age and canopy from beyond 10 years. But from 0 to 10 years, I think we get a really good correlation between age and canopy volume.
Don't forget, everybody, that you can add your questions in the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. Nigel, are there any gaps in the BOM data, and is it possible for growers to include their own weather station information into the model? Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I think the tool is always limited by the available data. I mean, we have harvested data from as close as we can possibly get to the growing regions that we are working in. However, there's huge potential for us to input growers' individual orchard historical data into the tool. So, if anyone's got years of historical data, we would love to be able to access that, especially if you're in an area where there's lots of growers around you. That would be really informative for the whole region. I think that would be absolutely wonderful. And it's very simple for us to input that data. And so you might be able to download your last decade of climate data from your climate station and send that to us, and we can just put that straight up into the tool. So the more information we can get from you guys, the better. And so the next stage of the story is obviously tapping into your I guess weather station and also your soil moisture monitoring software, whatever sort of soil moisture monitoring technology you use. We want to be able to access that info to put that straight into the tool as well for a forecasting aspect, forecasting part of the tool. So please get in touch with me. I can't ask you enough to get in touch with me.
All right, thanks, Nigel. We might leave it there. So if any of you have any data that you'd be willing to share with Nigel, please get in touch with him. He loves data and he'd like some more of it, and it will really help to build a better model in the end. So
thanks, everyone. Appreciate you participating.
Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Jonathan Brooks from AgFirst, who I'm sure many of you also know. He'll speak about the future orchard, where are we now and where are we going? So Jonathan has been involved in the New Zealand horticultural industry for more than 30 years and has a strong practical knowledge of pip fruit. He specialises in helping professional growers identify and monitor key performance indicators in the orchard business to find practical, cost-effective solutions to help lift performance and optimise profitability. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what we're going to cover off today is, as Rose has said, is we're going to cover off the culmination of all of the last 4 years work that we've done with Future Orchards. So basically, you know, what is orchard excellence now and where it's going in the future. So when we're looking at an introduction to this, I mean, basically the success of the Future Orchards of our future orchard, or that future orchard, will be based on ensuring all the topics that we're doing now, we're doing them well, and there's no real weak links. So there is no absolute winner. All of these things, the quality, the climate, the trees, labour and technology, all need to be done correctly and focused on in their own right. So when the first one we're going to cover off is the quality, the consumer quality. If you're not actively trying to target what the consumer wants, you're going to be left behind. It's a key part of it. We can do whatever we like, but if we're not focusing on the consumer, we're really in trouble. And the next part of that is, if you don't understand your target customer, you can't target the quality that they need. Quality doesn't mean the same thing to all customers. So it is quite critical that you understand your specific customer and who it is you're trying to actually deliver to. So the next part of that is actually making sure you are becoming close to your customer. Growers need to be able to get feedback from the customer, make sure that it's positive, and even if it is negative, and you need to understand what their wants are and make sure that you're actually trying to supply what that is. That can come through from seamless information transfer, so that you are getting in contact with them. You know, you haven't got any roadblocks in the chain. The marketing or the packing facility, the grower is actually getting on the ground and able to talk to the customer as well. From that, you need to be spending time listening and learning, and then making adjustments to the orchard, and just continuously focusing on improvement. So when we're talking about quality, quality does take many forms. It doesn't really matter if it's hit and blotch, you know, from poor pruning or light crop or low calcium levels. It doesn't matter if it's pest or disease damage or damage from frost, or even the increased colour demands from the market. So whether you need to be looking at changing strains just to meet those customer demands. All of these things need grower understanding and good grower management focus. So what we have had introduced, and you know, a lot of the variety clubs and marketing groups have popped up, and they can help growers with systems, market access and variety brand management. You know, it is important to acknowledge that they do come at a cost, and they do actually have to add value to the grower bottom line. But they are a way of professionalising, you know, a lot of things, and making sure that we are, you know, all heading in the same direction and delivering, you know, delivering what we need to the grower. So as I said before, the customer is the king or the queen. You know, the decisions that we're making on orchard, you know, we need to make sure we're considering what the impacts of that is going to be on the customer. And to be successful for the future, it's critical that you know who that customer is. And you need to know what their market quality requirements are. So the next subject I want to cover off is talking about managing climate. It's another key part of the chain in how we're going to manage for the future. We need to think about long-term sustainable management plans based around understanding the orchard location and the risks, whether that be winter chill, whether it be frost, hail, heat, drought, floods, any of those things that can actually cause loss to the orchard and the crop. So we need to make sure the right crops and varieties and the right systems are actually are being grown. We need to be farming how and where it's suitable to do so, and just making decisions that target production and quality alongside the best fit with the national environment. You can't fight nature, we all know that, and so we've just got to work with it. So when we're talking about a summary for climate, we need to understand the risk or reward from climate, and key part of that is there is potential reward as well. You know, you've got to focus on what your wins actually are. So if you're in a place that's early, such as Shepparton, well, you need to be working on that. If you're in places that have got cooler conditions and good colour, you need to be working on that too. So each specific orchard situation needs to be understood, and you need to be using some measurement models to assess the risk. I mean, we need to be following what's happening and planning for the future and understanding what the future is likely to entail. So whether that be short or long-term plans, we need to be focusing on what potentially could be a negative impact and what we can do about it, developing the systems that we need to develop. So next part is actually talking about variety choice and orchard systems, another year that we were focusing on. This is a really interesting area. It has a lot of opinions about what's right and wrong, but it is plagued by trends and newfangled fashions. It needs to be done right and needs to be done at the right speed. It's about continuous improvement. You know, as I said, things change. We need to understand the risk and reward of change. So it's quite important that, you know, when we change, it does come at a cost, and we can't do it all at the same time. But doing nothing is not an option for the future. So we need to seize opportunities and make sure we're minimising mistakes along the way. When we're talking about new varieties, most of you would have seen this matrix that we put together at one of the other presentations. We need to understand the market fit of a variety, what are the quality attributes, market potential, accessibility, and also the financial fit of the variety. You know, what are the returns, what's the variety risk, what's the production potential. The next part is actually going through and understanding the location fit, as we said before. What's the climate, what's the orchard specifics, what's the harvest timing. So does it suit my market? Does it suit my harvest timing? Does it make sense financially? Fits my risk profile, location. And the other thing that I think is important too is it comes with a team of growers or marketers that you're happy to work with. And that is a key part of it, making sure you're part of a good team as well. So as well as variety, it's important that we understand canopy design. Different options need to have strengths and weaknesses understood. Canopy design is about function and personal preference. If you don't believe in the system, it's guaranteed to fail. And thinking about it, it's about the impact on quality, and you know, places such as Shepparton, I mean, snow risk is not so important as it is maybe in some of the other cooler regions. But you do need to understand yield, cost, structural integrity, real world experience. It's a key part. Going out and being at the front end of some of these newfangled systems, sometimes it's the best place to be, sometimes it's not. But remembering it is about personal preference. There can be more than one right system, and you know, if you don't believe in a system, then it is guaranteed to fail. So talking systems, you know, it doesn't really matter whether it's a V trellis or whether it's a formal 2D system or a FOPS type system, or whether it's just a slender spindle. Each system does work for growers, but they need to be focused believers. They need to really believe that that's the system that's right for them. One thing about the modern systems that we do have to consider, you do need some overarching rules around them. You know, whether it be the stuff that Craig talks a lot about, the SNAP stuff, simple, narrow, accessible and productive, whether it's actually going through and thinking about the light capture, the love stuff, optimum yield and vigor, variability, eliminating limiting factors, and just overall management. Doesn't matter so much. You just got to make sure that it fits with your growing system, and it fits with your specific site and overall business. So this is an area that I'm actually quite passionate about. New varieties and new systems are all pretty cool, and lots of excitement, a lot of fun. But what we do know is we can't change everything all at once. So we need to focus quite heavily on our existing business as well. And we need to make sure that that's up to spec as much as it can be. So, we need to be making sure that we are monitoring what is happening on each individual block, and making sure that the blocks are working to their full potential. The other thing that's quite key is ensuring that the orchard that is being changed, it's being changed at the right speed. 5 to 15% a year of your orchard. If you go much higher than that, it really kills cash flow and makes life very, very hard. So it's key that if you do need to, we know that we have to keep blocks and that you keep your ears and eyes open to ensure that you're actually meeting the needs of the consumers, meeting the needs of the systems, labour and the climate. So little things do matter, and so you just got to try and keep up with what you can with the existing ones before you get to the point where they have to be changed over sometime in the future. Said there, I mean, we don't believe this is going to be the future. 30 to 40 tonnes a hectare is not going to be sustainable in the future. But you do need to understand within that, what can you do to actually improve that or keep that going? If you need to keep that in until you can get it turned over, what is available? Can you put mulch? Can you grow a bit more canopy? Is there anything you can do to keep that ticking over until it can be changed? So when we're talking about the canopies, varieties and canopies, they need to meet the current needs of climate mitigation and management, quality and customer demand, production and profitability expectations, and task efficiency. Systems with the right variety are a key part of the entire system. It's important all links in the chain are strong, and as I said before, any one of these things, if you've got great weakness in that area, that's where you're actually going to be limited. So the next thing we're talking about is labour and task management. It's an area that we've had another year of good focus on, and it's a key one that we need to look at. Labour is a huge cost to growers, and it's a low-hanging fruit for ensuring we're doing it correctly. It is basically the largest cost, but for labour we need to be concentrating on planning, systemising, monitoring and managing. We need to come up with short and long-term solutions for maximum results. We're not going to do it all at once, and there is, as I said, low-hanging fruit where you can actually where you can make gains even on existing blocks. So it's about understanding the big picture. So when we're talking short-term labour solutions, it's about creating plans. It's about crop load plans, vigour, pruning, thinning, harvest, making sure that there's information-based stuff. I don't believe that you can, in days gone by, you used to just do things by eye. I think we need to have a little bit more professional backup on that. So you need to be measuring or monitoring to ensure that you're doing stuff correctly. Value is there for making sure the job is done right. So tasks done well early, such as pruning, often make it easier or cheaper later on. There's a suggestion here that every dollar that you spend at pruning and get it right, you'll save yourself another dollar in thinning and later on in the season. So we need to be making systems and ideas and tasks that minimise the worker decision, keeping it simple. So how many branches do I need in a tree? How many branches can I remove? Where am I going to leave them in the tree? Which area do I focus on? How much detail gets done on each of those branches? So start off making it a little bit technical based on information, but then turn it into into information to the workers that is kept nice and simple. So also focus on using additional tools where they're needed, such as dormancy breakers or vigor control techniques or reflective mulch. So not only is it the task where you've got labour, but you might need to back that up with other things to ensure that you're getting the best out of what you're trying to achieve. And so again, lots of small gains add up. So it may seem like not much to go through and measure or do some sort of vigor control or put some reflective mulch at, but it all adds up at the end of the year. So when we're talking longer term labour solutions, that's about orchard systems, making sure you've got orchard systems set up just focused on labour efficiency. It's about getting the genetics and the varieties that give the best colour or the best quality so that you just don't have to think too hard when you've got your workers. It's about potentially bringing in robotics or sensor technology that says I can actually pick the stuff, minimise the labour input, or really upgrade the way that labour needs to think. It's about excellent canopies, making sure they're controlled with vigour, all of those things. It's reducing waste. It's not growing fruit or shoots that actually have a cost, but you don't end up using them. So when we're talking about improving the productivity of labour, we kind of need to understand what changes the potential of workers. We travel distance, how tired they are, how easy the task is, or complicated in the other direction, how motivated the pickers or the pruners or the thinners are. Are you giving them clear instruction on what they should be doing? Is there confusion anywhere? Conditions, team environment, all of those things, and feedback as well. Is there good feedback that's actually letting them know that they're doing it right or not doing it right? When we think about how do we increase the output rate of labour, the key thing is, do we change the worker or do we change the working conditions? Thinking about the worker, I've got one here that I think a Kiwi is going to be no better at picking apples than what we have here. Able to reach high with built-in tool pouch, whether it be pruning, whether it be picking. Yeah, fantastic. Big challenge is we can't give it clear and simple instructions. So what we need to be thinking about is efficiency and effectiveness training. How is it that we're going to minimise the movements? How are we reading the trees, whether it be at pruning or thinning or at harvest? Have we got equipment and is it correct and are we using it correctly? We've got workers that are motivated to do the job. And are the workers being checked and given good feedback? Are they being told if the things are going well, and are they being told if things aren't going well? When we think about changing the work, most of the stuff here in New Zealand and in Australia is picked, with the old school ladders. I know in Shepparton there is a number of areas where you have gone to picking platforms and stuff, but it's really important that you understand the efficiency gains that can be put through these sort of things. We need to think about minimal movement. How do we make things more and more efficient? Is it a more motivational environment? Is it ease of task? Can we make things more simple? And then we also need to understand, can we use some of this equipment for multiple labour tasks? Can this be used for tree training and then for pruning, or pruning, tree training, thinning, and then harvest as well? But what we also need to decide is it's got to fit the specific orchard business scenarios. So what this machine in places where they've got hills or where they've got different canopy styles just doesn't work. So you need to understand what is going to fit and where it's going to fit and what is the solution for your own specific orchard. And each orchard potentially could come with different solutions. So people, how is it we're going to find them? In the past, we've focused on the grey nomads. We've focused on all of the people coming in as backpackers. In New Zealand, we have a focus on the RSCs the seasonal workers coming in. Where are we going to get these people, and how are we going to ensure that we've got them for the future? Are we using social media to track them down? Are we actually making sure that on a cold day that a couple of sausage rolls or a pie might be good? What is the way that we actually are going to ensure that we've got the best out of the people we've got? The next bit is what's going to happen with COVID-19. Potentially there is going to be less backpackers coming. There's likely to be less tourists. There's likely to be more challenge on the seasonal worker programs. Potentially there's more unemployed people looking for work, so maybe that's a positive. Maybe that needs to be focused, and maybe we need to target that area and see if we can bring people into our industry. There's also potential for worker hygiene challenges, things that we did before we may not be able to do. And my experience with this last season that's gone through COVID, it's just more difficult. So when we're talking labour, we need to focus on continuous improvement. We need to be planning, systemising, monitoring and managing. It's about focusing on short and long-term improvement, but with the right job, at the right price, and with the right people. So the last bit I want to cover off at the moment is technology. Implementation of the correct technology will be a key piece in long-term sustainability of orchard businesses. There's lots of cool things being done and developed, whether it be leaf plucking or harvesting or mapping or data collection. There's huge amounts of those sort of things going on at the moment, and they're all quite interesting, but it needs to be the correct technology. And not all of them are going to be correct. So what we have is technology that's being developed at the moment on sensing stuff. So going through and measurements, like Nigel's got here with the water stuff and the nutrition stuff, all going to be really interesting to understand how to improve things and make things more efficient. Data management's another area where there's a huge amount of work being done, understanding data and turning it into knowledge and wisdom, those sort of things, making things more efficient. No one likes collecting data, but people like data output. So how are we going to do that more easily? Another area that's important is the area of automation. The picking and the grading stuff that's being developed, precision spraying, pruning equipment, all sorts of things in that area are actually going through. And then last in the year is design, orchard design. Are they being set up in a way that makes things future-proofed? Is it more sustainable, both environmentally, economically, all those sort of things? So when we're talking about technology, not all of the technology will provide gains. There is some stuff out there that's pretty cool, shiny stuff, but it's not necessarily going to add to the bottom line. So you need to understand what works and what does not, and how you can incorporate it in your system to make it work properly. To be correctly adopted, it needs to be commercially available. It needs to be cost effective. It needs to be able to create decisions or actionable outcomes. Focused on efficiency and effectiveness. Adaptable to your own individual orchard system with your orchard team, so it needs to be able to work with the people you've got or retrain the people you've got or somewhere along those lines. It must be able to add value to the business. So when we're talking about targeting future excellence, why we need to target excellence, it's about the health and well-being of the community and the environment and the overall sustainability of the orchard business. This is why we have to get this underway, and it's not going away. And if we don't focus in this area, we're not going to be around. What we need to focus on, we need to understand global and local requirements, what's happening in the world. We need to create a seamless integrated system so that we can talk to our customers and understand what their needs are. We can understand what the environmental impacts of what we do is, where climate's going to have an impact, all of those things. So we need to have these integrated systems that feed in and out of our business. We need to focus on reduction of waste. It's a key part of it. Waste, a lot of things we think of as waste is actually an asset we've paid for somewhere, and now we're actually getting rid of it. So we need to think about it that way. Think of it as a value. And we also think about production efficiency. We need to focus on the consumer. What is it? What are their requirements for crop and for taste and nutrition? Then how are we going to do that? We need to do it by individual growers in the entire industry learning and understanding what's available. We need to understand what is available and integrate this as best fit solutions into the business. So finally, when we're talking about best orchards, the best orchards are targeting excellence, focused on quality, climate, orchard and labour needs and where they're all going. We've got a continuous improvement backbone for the business, and they introduce technologies that create a culture of targeted excellence. So it's about making sure that you're always looking forward, you're always looking around, and you're always understanding that the future is where you need to be focusing on, and what is it that's going to come and disrupt your business as it is now, and what's going to disrupt your business going into the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I think that's a great summary of the last 4 or 5 years of, or probably even more of the Future Orchards program. You've identified a lot of decision-making points. So I'm wondering, over the last 10 years or so, there have been a lot of increases, or significant increases in quality and production in Australia. Can you identify where some of the greatest improvements have been made based on some of the topics that you've covered: system design, quality, variety, technology? Where do you think some of the greatest improvements have been made, or as a result of any of those components? And where do you think Australian growers can still improve into the future?
So I think there's been some fantastic gains. Actually, every year we come back, we focus on an area, and then we come back and we see gains in that particular area. So all of the things I've covered off, I've seen some really, really good gains in. I think that the key part is understanding what's absolutely pertinent to your orchard and your situation. So the gain that you might make in one area might be completely different from the gain you make in another area. It's the focus on understanding what is the limiting factor, or the greatest limiting factor in your own personal orchard. But gains on production have been fantastic. Gains on focus on climate, gains on focus on labour, all of those, and quality. All of those things have been have really shown up. But the problem is that every time you fix a greatest limiting factor, you end up with another greatest limiting factor. It's just the nature of it. So.
Yeah. Jesse's asked, what is the most widely adopted piece of technology in New Zealand at the moment?
Widely adopted piece of technology. Probably, I would have thought a focus on new varieties. Actually, it's probably a key part of it. Making sure that we have got the variety that targets the customers in the export markets we're looking for. There's a lot of new technologies going through in there, and everyone's got their own little bit. But I think as a accumulation of what's going on in New Zealand, probably the variety focus is the big one.
Yeah, okay. That's a somewhat, I guess, unexpected answer, but yeah, okay. If there are no other questions, I'd also like to say, if you have any comments on, what you might see as the most important areas where technology could be improved, or other comments about what's being presented today, please just make some suggestions and comments in the Q&A section as well, where they might just be statements that you'd like to add. They don't need to be questions. It's just good to get some feedback. Okay, we'll come back to you shortly, Jonathan, when we travel back to New Zealand and visit some orchards. I'd like to now introduce Mick, who I'm sure you all know who is the FLA for the Goulburn Valley region, and he's going to present an update on some of the trials that he's been working on in your region. Thanks very much, Mick.
Thanks, Rose. Okay, so yeah, welcome everybody. Sorry I couldn't cook a barbecue today, but I'm sure the next Orchard Walk I should be able to cook you some bacon and eggs for breakfast next time. All right, so so obviously, yeah, with as part of my role as an FLA with the Future Orchards project, annually we have to do 2 trials within our local region. I've done a couple of trials, but one that I want to report on today is obviously comparing Pink Lady primary thinning methods. So we did 4 plots at Plunkett Orchards in Ardmona, where we done 4 different treatments, obviously. So we did ATS in conjunction with a Darwin thinner, ATS only, a Darwin thinner only, and a control, which was hand thinned at the normal time like the rest of the treatments were. So obviously the aim was to compare the marketable yield and also, get a size profile that we can compare between all of the treatments. And again, yeah, all plots were hand thinned as per normal program. So if we move to the next slide, so obviously the Darwin thinner alone, so if you can see the machine on the left hand side at Plunkett's, and that's in the plantings of 3.5 by 1.5. Then we have what obviously the chemical we use, ATS thin it at the 1.5 litres per, 15 litres per hectare or 1.5%. So if we go to the next slide, so again, the block metrics 3.5 metres by 1.5 twin litre by barm, so 1,904 trees per hectare. The rates of ATS 15 litres a hectare, 1.5%. The timing of the ATS was 1 day prior to full bloom, and the Darwin thinner timing was 3 days prior to full bloom. So obviously this season, when Pink Ladies in this particular block were flowering, it was quite a quick blossom period. So it went from 20% blossom to 100% blossom within 5 days. Just so each plot I collected, we picked more than 150 pieces. We also did fruit counts as well within those plots. And, it wasn't my goal to really look so much at yield, but obviously yield, there's been a key difference noted with yield, especially where the 2 treatments with the Darwin thinner was. So it's actually set more fruit where we used the Darwin thinner than what we did with either ATS or a control. So, which suggests to me that I think that the Darwin thinner, and also Jason can concur with this, has actually aided pollination. So I think that's an interesting point that wasn't intended to see in this trial, but I think it's an unintended result. So yeah, so I'll move on to the next slide. So what my main intention obviously for this trial was to try and get a bit of an indication of pack out performance. So if you see, where the value is, obviously the high values in those counts, 60, 65, 70, 76. That's on a normal year for Pink Ladies. I would say, if we keep going to the next slide, I would say some of this data that we've got on this particular graph indicates what the value can be on a normal year, but definitely not this year. So obviously with the lighter crops and there seems to be less smaller fruit available, the smaller counts are comparative to some of the larger counts. But on a normal year, this sort of data we'll see. So if we continue to click on, you'll see that prices, if you base it at $32 a box, $2.67. Some of the larger counts, the medium stuff is probably 28, where this year it's very comparable, and pre-packs are also comparable when you look at a 9 kilo box instead of a 13 kilo box. And also, juice price on this graph's $150, where this year we're up around the 400 to 450. So so obviously, yeah, move on. Obviously, I was trying to with APAL, also with the help of APAL and some of the data analysis, and also Rose, we tried to come up with a bit of a graph to capture the amount of fruit within each of the size counts. This isn't correct. It's a bit hard to get that result, a lot harder than I thought, and I'm going to need a bit more time, but hopefully by the end of it, we may have a tool that, you know, we can enter the weight and the size of the fruit, and then obviously, you know, if we strip pick a few trees, we could give a good indication of the size profile for that pick, as you know, as a forecast, or yeah, for packing sheds. So anyway, we'll move on from there. So just in summary, I did struggle to see much difference in the size profile between the 5 plots, whether it was, you know, control, ATS, or Darwin thinner. So obviously, I think Pink Ladies, that's a tough thing to get a bit of a difference. I think if we did do Gala, we'd probably get a better indication of the difference of a primary thinning result. Obviously, there was more fruit set, like we said before, that on the blocks that we put the Darwin thinner through. Yeah, enhanced pollination. The farm block that the trial was conducted on, I would say, was very consistent at blossom, and definitely had a lot of good calm wood throughout of similar caliper. So I think that's definitely a key aspect in ensuring that we did get a consistent size profile through that block. And obviously, Pink Ladies are a lot easier to achieve a consistent size profile than what a Gala would be. So obviously, we'll keep working on this spreadsheet to see if we can capture the size profile on a graph that we can all understand. But yeah, I'd like to thank Jason and Donga from Plunkett Orchards for their help, and also Rose and Alvin from APAL for the work that we've got so far on our spreadsheets. But we've definitely got to do a bit more work. So, you know, if Jason wants to jump in with any comments, or if there are any questions and Jason wants to jump in, more than welcome. So that's it.
Probably the only point that I'd probably like to make about the results that we've seen, everything was hand thinned back to normal, like what we normally would. We went through with the crews. But the one thing that, for all of the blocks that I did this year, my lightest crops that I did have on the 2 blocks that never got any thinner at all were my lightest blocks. So I had in my head sort of all year been saying, geez, it seems like the Darwin thinner has set fruit. You know, whether that's potentially through pollination or just knocking crop load off early to strengthen the buds. I have no proof or evidence, but the good thing out of this result, as soon as Mick sent it to me, it was like, you know, bang, there's actually some proof that, you know, it was, and the block did, it did yield 65 tonnes on average. So it is, you know, similar to what we did get with the results with the Darwin thinner, because the whole block was done with the Darwin thinner. And the other thing that you need to probably think about as well is there wasn't any significant fruit size difference, but there was 20% more fruit on the Darwin thinner trees. So if it had been the other way around and the trees had normally had 20% more fruit that didn't have the Darwin thinner, I wonder whether they would have been smaller. You know, so we did get the same size fruit, but with 20% more crop load. Is probably the only 2 points but yeah, I would say this year that the Darwin thinner, you know, I think it did its job, but where we didn't use it, it just everywhere shed. We had flowers everywhere. But where we didn't use the Darwin thinner this year, we had bigger shed than normal. Where we probably got the results that we normally would with the Darwin thinner, it's just that where we didn't use it, we got really severe shed results, which is not normal. So it's just due to this season.
There's a question as to why you only use the Darwin thinner and no other types of thinner were tested, because there aren't any available at the moment.
So what other?
So the types of thinners used for this experiment, the Darwin thinners are great, but we don't have one available at the moment.
So we do have, they are available. They are commercially available. They have been for 15 years. We've got one that's 15 years old, and there would be 20 Darwin thinners in Australia that have majorly been used on stone fruit. So yeah, so they are available. I don't know of any others that are available in Australia. There is one or two others that I have heard of, but I've never seen them. And just because we have a Darwin thinner, so we were able to do the trial because we had the machine.
And also too, I'd just like to add as well that, you know, other primary thinners are available, but they're not commonly used on Pink Lady. Like, you know, we've got other NAA and stuff like that, but that's a scary proposition as a primary thinner, especially on Pink Lady. And the common primary thinner would be ATS. And then in Jason's case, they've got the Darwin thinner as well. So.
Yeah, and the other bit with any other, like, it was a commercial trial. It wasn't like, you know, we didn't go and make up 20 litres of chemical and go and spray. You know, we just left. The good thing about the Darwin thinner is you can just leave a row and do either side of it, and there's no spray drift, there's no other implications. You can leave a bay really easy. So, you know, it was just, we were using the machine. I said, you know, we said, what about doing a trial with this?
Okay. So I guess hopefully that answers your question. I'm curious about the pollination that you mentioned, Mick. Do you have any idea as to why that may have increased? Is that
look, I imagine just, well, yeah, I imagine just maybe just the contact with the pollinator, and then, you know, all the petals and pollen flying around with the Darwin thinner when it's blowing through as well. So I think
yeah, like I asked this question when they had the pollinator people at the APAL conference or whatever it was in Melbourne, and because they said pollen can stay viable, I think it was, they might have said 24 hours, but don't quote me on that. But like, we are hitting our pollinators and then sending the strings through all the trees of all the, like, so it kind of makes sense that, and if you look at the strings, there's plenty of sap on them. Or not, you know, pollen on them, sorry, not sap. So it makes sense that it possibly could happen. But then you just look at all the flowers going everywhere. There's pollen, just airborne pollen, you know, going everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot more flying around.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions, or would you like to make any other comments? It was really nice to see some cost-benefit analysis in the results that you presented, Mick. I think it'd be nice to see a bit more of that in some of the other trials that we've seen around the other regions. So it's always a good way to express the results. So that was nice.
There's plenty of work to do there, and I think if we could come up with a tool that growers can actually use as well, will help a lot too. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. We'll have a look into that.
Just a little bit of a note from me. At the Darwin thinner, we've done a bit of work on it as well, and the challenge is kind of getting the calibration right for the trees is probably the bit. You know, sometimes you get fantastic results, but it's the operator plays a key part in how well it works. Just a comment.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Like, it's probably the only time I sit in a tractor. Yeah. But I do go, when I was doing it, I'm like, if I nail it, I'm like going each row, this is, you know, $1,000, $1,000, $1,000, you know, it's, if you get it right, it can be significant, you know, a significant windfall.
Okay. All right. Well, in the interest of Zoom exposure, we might move on. And thank you, Mick, and thank you, Jason, for coming online as well. It was very brave of you to put your face on camera. We'll move on to, we're heading back to New Zealand now, and Jonathan is going to take us through some orchards in New Zealand to see what is happening over there. So Jonathan, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so this is a video of that Ross put together with Mark Erickson. Many of you guys will remember Mark. He's quite a character from over here. So he's going to show us one of his blocks of jazz that's been quite successful, and how he's managing the pruning of that. So, yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're here at Waimar Orchard with Mark Erickson, the owner of Waimar, on my right, and Warren Grant, who's the orchard manager, on my left. Welcome Warren, Mark. And we're here in a beautiful sunny Hawke's Bay day today to go through with Mark and Warren one of the blocks of jazz that's on their property, because as you'll hear later, it's a real standout. But first of all, before we get into that, Mark, can you just give us an introduction of Waimar and how the property's evolved to where it is. Thanks, Ross.
As everyone on the Northern Loop knows, I like to correct Ross every so often, so I'm going to correct him and say I'm a part owner of Waimar Fruit Company, Waimar Orchards, in conjunction with my mother and father. So yeah, my wife and I run it with my mother and father, and fourth generation on this property, so caretakers of the land. Waimar in Māori means clear white water. So we're very fortunate. We've got beautiful soils here, and Ross and I have been in partnership together for the nurturing of these crops for probably the last 15 years. So yeah, Warren, our assistant manager, he's been with us for 2 years, and he's got an abundance of knowledge with tree husbandry and a lot of technical aspects too.
This has been a stunning block in terms of its productivity and profitability now for 3 years in a row. And just to give you some idea, the Jazz average in this region averages about 65 tonnes per hectare. Normally it packs out pretty well, about 80% class 1. This particular block that's behind us has been doing somewhere between 100 tonne, and this year it did 115 tonne gross per hectare. It packed out at around 85% class 1. The colour was good and the fruit size was good. So although the yield was very high, like way higher than the average, nearly double the average, the fruit quality was superb. So we just want to discuss what they think has actually contributed to this block being such a high performer. So Mark, what do you reckon it's down to?
Well, we talk about the 3 C's, so calm, consistent and canopy.
Yeah, I reckon we should go in and have a look at the trees, Mark, and have a look at what's part of them. So let's do that. Another thing I'd like Mark and Warren to talk about is how they get down to their crop load target, because I think this is one of the fundamentals, is Waimar gets down to their optimum crop load target more quickly than a lot of other growers do, and I reckon that's putting a lot of the resources that the leaf, that the tree produces into the fruit that they want to harvest earlier on. I think that's quite significant, but you want to explain how you do that, Mark. First with the chemical thinning, and then how Warren manages to get that fruit number at hand thinning. So yeah.
So yeah, Ross and I, we have these different recipes from the year before or the year before that. We just keep refining things. It's a living document effectively, and what's working for us doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work the year after, but hand in hand it's been working well for us. The girdle's actually been a real big positive and a big part of that success, because it's given us a reliable flower number and strong flowers going into the chemical thinning. So Ross and I, we come up with those recipes, we try to get the crop load down very early, so the primary sprays are very important to us, and Ross and I will come up with a figure. Sometimes I might put a little bit extra in there as a bonus, what I call the feel-good factor. But I am quite an aggressive chemical thinner, because for my way of thinking, if you can get the crop load down as quick as you can without overdoing it, because it's all about making sure we've got our canopy full with fruit, then obviously it's going to pay us big dividends down the track.
Okay, another little advertorial here for OrchardNet. So Waimar are very good users of OrchardNet. And every year, every block has a target of what they're going to farm to. And this particular block, we set a target last winter actually, that we wanted to farm to about 110 tonnes per hectare of a 162 gram piece. And as you look at this tree, and perhaps Jack can sort of show you the tree, to achieve that sort of number, we needed to harvest, we thought, about 425 fruit a tree. Now, you don't always get what you thin to in a bin. There's always this pick out that we call it. But last year, Warren, as the orchard manager, had a target to thin these to, and the target was 483 fruit per tree at thinning. So you got it right, Warren. You want to just tell us what you did to actually achieve that?
Yeah, just following on from that, Ross here. Ross does very good work setting up these plans with Orchard Net for what we want to thin to. We'll do pre-counts after we put a chemical thinner through before we hand thin, and we'll get a feel for what we need to thin to on the tree. Whether what we aim for is ideally everything in singles, but that's not always possible. Having done the pre-counts, we garner some good information throughout the block. We set up a recipe of how we're going to hand thin and what number we're going to hand thin to. We'll set up very simple rules for the thinners when they come in for their hand thin, and we'll stick to those rules and monitor that very closely.
Okay, so everyone loves a pruning demonstration, so now we're going to do a pruning demonstration on these trees. Take you through what we're doing. Just to give you the fundamentals, we're actually targeting 115 tonne this coming year. We reckon on this block we need about 2.5 buds per fruit. That's where we've been the last few years, and we're happy with the vigour cropping balance that produces. So that means we're targeting about 1150 buds per tree, and we've got to leave the best 1150 buds on the tree. We've got to prune the tree so there's good light to all parts. Typically this is a 3.7 metre row spacing. We've decided that the tree cropping height wants to be no more than 4.1 metres, which Warren's got a measurement on his hydroladder. So 4.1 metres maximum height. We're aiming for 24 branches in the tree, and now Warren's going to take us through how he achieves those goals.
Yeah, we can't stress enough the importance of good consistent pruning. So I'm just about to remove a dominating branch here in the upper part of the tree. We take our big cuts out of the tree first. I'll normally go through with a chainsaw actually throughout all the blocks and make those decision cuts. So then when we send the pruners through on ladders, they are not having to think too hard. We'll set them some very simple basic rules. There's another removal of a branch here. That's my 2 cuts up here, and now I'm ready to prune the top of this tree. We always seal our cuts with a bit of what we call garrison. There's also a product called back seal, just to protect the tree against any disease. Starting at the top here, we'll leave what we call one sap drawer on the centre of the tree, and I'll remove any long upright growth first, or anything very close in to the trunk. And then I'll just follow my branch along and look for big spur clusters or wide arms which aren't required. And then I'll just move my way down the tree, follow each branch and be systematic in how you prune. Then things are not overlooked and missed. The rules that we apply for our what we call our detail pruning, we take any upright branches that are right along the plane of the branch. Anything that's laying along the top of the branch that's long and rank we'll take. We'll try and leave side arms where we've got nice open space and light. And then on the ends we sometimes will single the end off. When we've got competition here, we want to reduce the bud numbers. The only other rule we have in here when we have far too many bud numbers and bud density is we will halve up some of these bud clumps, or sometimes total removal. In this situation here, I'm just going to remove this particular clump here and halve it, instantly reducing the numbers. I might even do the same here and just halve that, just to reduce the numbers at thinning time. Yep. Here we go now. So I make my decisions on the fly as I go, and I'll follow each branch. And over the top here has to go a young branch like this. I want it to grow more, so I'm going to run it very slender. Once I've done my main cuts off here, I'm just going to double check if there's anything I've missed. I might do a few spurs in there, a couple in there, maybe I'll get rid of that one. I don't like that one now, and just leave that spur. That's a finished product.
Jonathan, I always find it quite amazing that the person in your video obviously has a lot of experience and knows which branches to prune and which ones to leave. And I know a lot of pruning is done by transient workers, so it always amazes me that they're able to be trained up quickly enough to do a good job at the pruning.
Yeah, so for me, that is part of the key part of the challenges we have with labour, and we do need to get quite technical with what we're trying to achieve to see those sort of tonnages that they're getting. They are spending a lot of time counting branches and counting buds and understanding what they need to do what they need to leave and what they need to remove. But the key part is that you turn that into simple rules. So you might say, I need to remove 2 or 3 or 4 branches in the top half of the tree. I will do so much detail. It might be a lot, it might be a little bit, but if those rules aren't simple, you can't turn it into, you can't guarantee it's going to happen.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the chemical thinning program that is applied in the orchard?
So basically, the chemical thinning that's done with Mark is a very aggressive chemical thinner. So Jazz is not generally something you'd class as a variety as super hard to thin, but he tends to come in quite early on with ethifon or ethyl and ATS, sometimes mixes, and then he'd potentially come in later on with maybe ANA and BA or just BA. So yeah, quite aggressive, but as Ross said, getting the fruit off nice and early, getting that carbohydrate going into the fruit that's staying there and getting good size and good yield out of that, but just quite brave.
Okay, right. Does anyone else on the panel have any other questions? There aren't many coming in through the Q&A. Does anyone else want to make some comments or have any questions? Jonathan, any more comments you'd like to make about the orchards that you've just shown us from New Zealand?
No, probably the only thing is I remember there's a comment made in one of the other meetings where they were talking about the size of the trees and the style of the tree. You've got to work with what you've got. Hawke's Bay, especially in New Zealand, we do suffer a lot from a lot of vigour. So we turn that to our advantage and try and grow a bigger tree that's calmed down, and one of the best ways to calm it down is by hanging more crop on it. So we're not trying to fight against it. We're just saying, okay, well, if the tree needs to grow more crop to get a good calm demeanour, well, that's what we're going to do. So.
Just adding on that point, that was going to be, it's not a question, it was probably more a statement, was we just seen 2 extremes of orchard there. Everyone's really excited about the new stuff, but that's a pretty good example of, if you do the right things with the old, like making the old stuff work, and none of the good stuff, is potentially going to be better than it. It might be a little bit more ease of management or whatever, but right now for, return for your dollar, if you've got that, you're going to make a lot of money to be able to invest in some new blocks. So it's not all about the new shiny, newest, latest, greatest, sort of thing, because that's as good as anything that you're probably going to see. And it, it looks a bit complicated and it looks all this, but, you need to be able to manage both. You can't just go for keep pulling out those blocks just as they're about to make you money, and keep planting because there's something new, because there will always be something new. Probably is just the point I would like to put.
Yeah, and for me, that's probably, hopefully, one of the take-homes I've got from the, what I was saying. It's it is a key take-home that apart from if the variety itself has kind of died. If the consumer doesn't want the variety, then it's kind of easy. Variety is still there and it's good variety. You do need to try and do your best to work with what you've got, for sure. Because it's real easy to just chase the rainbows.
Yeah, yeah. Like our best pink lady blocks aren't our best pink lady blocks. You know, and you'd love, like I keep going, oh, if we did this to them, we could make them look even more. But, you know, they're the ones that are making the dollars, you know, sort of thing. So, you know, you can't just go get rid of them because you want it to have the latest and greatest.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I find it's quite good to have that definition, 5 to 15% a year, and you're allowed to, you know, you're allowed to go and change that. That's it. You pick what it is, but that's all you're allowed to change. So it defines it, because it's easy to turn 5%, oh, you know, 15% to 25% to 40% in just the blink of an eye. Next thing, you've got no cash flow. Life becomes real hard real quick.
Okay, does anyone else have any other comments? There are no other questions, so we might leave it there for today. We've filled a good 2 hours, so I hope it's been useful for everybody that's been online. I'd like to thank Jonathan, Jason, Mick and Nigel for all the information that you've presented and your contribution today. We'd also like to acknowledge that this project, the Future Business Program, is funded by Horton Innovation using the Apple and Pear R&D levy and contributions from the Australian government. APAL has a lot more webinars coming up over the next few months, and you can see a summary of those here. In a couple of weeks, we've got the southern loop of the orchard walks, and in between, so next week you can tune in to hear a webinar about alternative controls for apple replant decline. Then we've also got some webinars coming up on irrigation management, water management, and managing water under drought conditions, adoption of AI technologies in horticulture. That is quite interesting and sort of relates to what we've been hearing about today about identifying key decision-making points in the orchard. Then we've got a webinar on netting trials from the US, from Washington State University, and a little bit later in August there'll be a webinar on nursery tree stock and reducing. So if you've got anything else that you have that you're particularly interested in, please let us know. And we'll do our best to accommodate that. It's always great to get some feedback. So in the meantime, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you at one of the upcoming webinars, or hopefully in person in the Future Orchard Walks in the orchard in September. Thanks very much for participating.